Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. My train got late, so that's why I arrived a bit late. I'm sorry for that, but the fact that we have in Portugal a right-wing government very interested in dismantling the structures of the state has a lot to do with that. So my late was also related with that. I will start as somebody that started in feminism in the late 90s with the abortion debate. Our generation, I'm thinking, for instance, Andrea Peniche, who is here, was very touched by that, and she even published a book on that matter, which is a very important book. I would like to reflect a bit about this inhabitation of feminism. I've been working on feminist theory since 1999. I started working on Marxist feminists since the beginning. And I was educated by formidable women who helped me a lot in this effort. I would like to say their names at least. Ligia Amancio, who taught me a lot about feminism. Conceição Nogueira, which was and is a very important reference in feminism in Portugal, and Lynn Siegel, a close friend of mine, that taught me a lot about feminism and about the fight for the rights of self-determination of Palestine, which is something that is quite important at this moment, and we need to say that there is a situation of colonization in Palestine and a genocide going on. So I want to start with that, acknowledging also the fact that we are now in the ruins of neoliberalism, in the destruction of this corporate-led ideology that is putting our lives in danger and the lives of our planet as well. So the title of my talk here is Feminism as a Communal Place. Challenges and Contribution of Socialist Feminists Fighting Fascisms. So, reading the literature and actively participating in the movement since the late 1990s, few people like me would believe in the possibility of a relationship between fascist forces competing for the political sphere and feminist groups. The literature of the first wave of feminism had already warned us about this unhappy and sordid proximity. Similarly, in the 80s and 90s, there were occurrences of feminist alliances with the conservative right to ban pornography in Canada, with always negative results from that alliance. So when feminists allies with fascism, the results are always, always terrible. Bringing together an alliance between pro-censorship conservative for moral reasons and feminists in this attempt to ban pornography very quickly led to unforeseen yet obvious consequences. This situation is helpful here of Canada. In 1992, Catherine McKinnon's analysis influenced the Canadian Supreme Court to permit the censorship of pornography, when it portrays, and I quote, women as a class as objects for sexual exploitation. Not surprisingly, Canadian censors first target gay and lesbian and even feminist bookstores in their effort to censor pornography. Uninformed and confused customs officials have seized books written by people such as Oscar Wilde, Audre Lorde, Marguerite Duras, and Jean Genet. So, quoting Ruth Rosen, poverty, not pornography, is what steals women's dreams and starves their spirits. The much publicized glass ceiling is not what affects most American women. It's the sticky floor that keeps so many women, especially women of color, glued to poverty. So, in a sense, this time of the 80s were very relevant in this beginning of a proximity between fascist, conservative ideologies and some forms of complicit feminisms, I would say. So I'm now looking at Andrea's working work on the idea of pornography in her book, 1987, Intercourse. And I quote her, "A woman being has a body that is inviolate, and when it's violated, it is abuse. a woman had a body that is penetrated in intercourse, permeable, its corporeal solidness a lie. The discourse of male truths, literature, science, philosophy, calls that penetration violation. This is what it does with some consistency and some confidence. Violation is a synonym for intercourse. Well, lots of feminists would argue against this type of definition of the heterosexual act as necessary a form of rape. So they appropriate the Marxist concept of commodification through a specific form they name objectification, which is central for this trend of radical feminism that has become increasingly essentialist since the late 70s and beginning of the 80s. However, in many moments, such objectification assumes many forms. Some of them seen as benign, and some feminists even discuss the topic of positive objectification, bringing in context the issue of consent and oppression as a necessary cause to produce this objectification effect. This approach presumes certain consensus, such as a shared understanding of what constitutes a woman, that remains ambiguous for other feminist perspectives, but they rely on common sense, which is, as we know, naturalizes gender in such a way that for everybody the definition of women seems to be quite clear. We would say that in feminism, such definition doesn't exist on that specific form, because probably the fact that women are defined in a certain way means they are appropriated in that way, and it means, at a certain sense, to limit their rights and their possibilities of existence, which is, for me, the central basis of feminism. So these specters of essentialism resurface gradually in these forms of feminism, and other feminisms have been resisting a lot to this. I'm thinking, for instance, the book by Sheila Robothson, Lynn Siegel, and Hilary Wainwright, Beyond the Fragments, that tries to build a socialist feminism that attends to these different forms of constitution of the subject women. But also, if we want to take their ideas seriously, we have to think about women as a class of people that through the processes of oppression, exploitation, recognition, and intelligibility have become a class treated as women. Simone de Beauvoir herself would agree with this, and with an idea that feminists must be kept open and not closed. A feminism that attempts to define women a priori through a conceptualization grounded in genitalia, chromosomes, capacity to gestate, elements naturalized as biological, but we know they are very much appropriated by capitalism, especially their reproductive capacity. These are not enough to define what a woman is. None of them are sufficient to produce this definition, whereas this premise of women as class, a class of people defined by their position in social relations and in the circuit of capital, through also looking at their conditions of living and materiality, would be a much more important and interesting basis for socialist feminism. Gender as a social relation marked by intersectionalities, we owe that to Black feminism, that they had the patience to teach us that, and that's a very relevant contribution to understand and to use in Marxist feminism. This idea of gender as a social relation marked by these intersectionalities is a conceptual achievement that comes from this theoretical and political heritage of struggle. Beauvoir's idea of the body as situated, the body as a situation, further details the logic of a body as a material reality located within and defined through culture. so open to as a place for social signification. The predicament, one is not born a woman, but rather becomes one, implies that the one that becomes woman might not even be a woman all along, and locates gender as a social relation within a political economy of becoming within this idea of body as situation. We have to note that Simone de Beauvoir was never interested in defining who becomes what, while producing a theory much more interested in the articulation between class recognition and materiality, which she called social relations of sex, than in making a list of ontological possibilities of what counts as women. Judith Butler makes a quite similar connection, voicing their disappointment in forms of feminisms that fail to keep their subject open. Questioning what a woman might be or do is an uncanny task for forms of feminism that are implicated in the possibility, in opening the possibilities of women for emancipatory purposes. So TERFism, trans-exclusionary radical feminism, and their obsession in what they see as woman, singular, and their willingness to participate in forms of negation of rights and opportunities situates them within the practices of policing gender, demanding forms of compliance with gender norms, reenacting barriers to gender recognition. This respectful manner of addressing people using their former and dead names, former positions in terms of social structure, negates solidarity among women, and engaging feminism with a demise of other women, and engaging us in the support of trans necropolitics. So this is a very serious matter. And we have been seeing this happening a lot, especially in the UK. And now, of course, with the new president of the US, in the US as well. So on both sides of the pond, in the Anglo world, this has becoming increasingly an hostile, an environment of hostility against trans women, particularly. So the new mantra shared by people like Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer in the UK, Rishi Sunak being using a more staggering expression like women with the penis, or even the idea of Keir Starmer that he doesn't believe that trans women are women, shows a very expanded consensus politically uniting Tories, and this even more neoliberal version of Labour Party that we have now in power in the UK. Entranced and entangled in a bromance that has been igniting trans hate throughout the UK, with the new politics of the artificially tamed president of the US, the situation of trans women is terrible on both these sides of the pond. The recent UK Supreme Court ruling, entirely influenced by flawed and turf groups supported by Joan's Harry Potter money, let's not use her social name because she doesn't want to be considered a trans, so let's call her Joan, and her millions, without this decision of the Supreme Court in the UK denying trans people's rights, was taken without listening to trans people or to trans group or even to feminists that are opposed to that sort of necropolitics. This court ruling has decided to reverse the extension of gender equality provision for trans women, even though they have gender certificates issued by the British government saying that they are women, basing that decision on a strict interpretation of sex in the Gender Equality Act. The effects are very perverse, namely in terms of creating an impossible situation for women in companies and in the public sphere for even to know to which toilet they should go. And of course, it's very humiliating to ask a trans woman to go to the men's toilet. It's dangerous. And dangerous, of course. The same thing happens in terms of imprisonment, because through these types of actions, they will be in jail in masculine penitentiaries. So these effects are very perverse. And a feminism that spends its time depriving women with the support of millionaires and receiving funds from anti-gender groups such as anti-choice groups, being in direct connection with the wider alt-right is, I think, very troublesome. And we don't want to share much with these groups, of course. In the case of Spain, there is also this type of positioning against trans people from state feminists that have very important positions. I'm thinking, for instance, of people like Amelia Valcárcel, which she's a member of the Spanish Council of State, and she produces declarations like this: don't say feminism is very diverse. Yours may be, not mine. She also warns against the confusion of making a confusion between gender and fashion, because she thinks that trans people, of course, belong to the fashion world and not to the real gender world. We have seen this type of problem, of the emergence of this complicity between forms of feminism and forms of fascism that are all engaged in the production of a moral panic against trans women, based inciting fear and loathing, so spreading very negative emotions and sharing them in the society, and much worse, assuming, some of them assume the position they are the voice of feminism when they come to talk in public. And I think that's quite alarming for us, because probably most of the people in this room don't want to be involved in that type of politics, especially under the name of feminism. So in terms of the moral panics, we have this idea of finding the scapegoat from where this hatred is generated and created. So the scapegoat are becoming trans women, and this social sharing of hate towards them is a very relevant feature of TERFism that can be seen as hate speech. So liberal and neoliberal feminisms can be seen also as complicit feminisms in this type of reasoning. And TERFism is even more in direct connection with these fascist groups because they share a common hate. And they are not afraid of voicing it anywhere. So sharing the same tenets and sacrificing the same victims as scapegoats. So in my view, socialist feminism needs to stay away from this complicity. And there cannot be a breach in solidarity with trans women and non-binary people, just as there cannot be a breach in solidarity with Palestinian and Sudanese women, just as we cannot yield a single millimeter in our solidarity towards all women. This does not deny differences. Feminism is a space for differences to occur and to exist and to enrich us. These are vital for affirming feminism. But it seems there is a very important necessity to be in solidarity with these groups that are so disconsidered. On the contrary, we have seen from these TERFs pressures for restrictive definition of the feminist subject, championed by groups that have found in trans women the way to express their gender fascism, which they have in common with the extreme right, with fascists, the kind that seeks to sever this notion of women as a sign of alliance and class and replace it with a sign of exclusion. A socialist feminist politics cannot serve the interest of this exclusion, nor of the liberal and fascist groups promoting them. Because we can see also the liberals interested in this scapegoat. It's far more relevant for a Marxist and socialist feminist politics to be inspired by the idea of fighting all struggles, as we say in the left bloc. Feminism is a space of the common. At present, we see various forms, and I'm just finishing, of liberal feminism opening flirting with neoliberalism, and several transphobic feminist groups presenting them as willing not only to receive fundings from the anti-abortion movement, but to ally themselves in discourses with millionaires who celebrate the humiliation of trans women in their deprivation of essential and basic rights, to share the same rhetoric as fascist parties such as Vox and Chega here, or increasingly neoliberal parties such as Labour that has adopted the same discourse. So in a sense, these gender ghosts that come from the past have gradually come to the fore in this new awful age of fascism so present in the public sphere, yet some of us still hope that feminism can constitute its main force of resistance, crafting a feminism that goes beyond the fragments and taking its historical subjects seriously, becoming woman, like defined by Simone de Beauvoir in 1949. A feminism that takes an a priori definition of womanhood through a reasoning based on genitalia and components naturalized as biological, but of course forming part of a restricted idea of what a woman is, overlooks this fundamental assumption of women as a class of people defined by a social relationship. And this can never be a part of socialist feminism. Gender, we can see, for instance, that we have lots of work that we can do. We can see how the extreme right is galvanizing and weaponizing women's rights in order also to bring up fascist ideas and spread fascist passions in society. We recently finished a study on Giorgia Meloni's case in Italy and the way how she uses women's rights in order to make racism a central part of the politics of the Italian state. And this is something that we need to be quite aware. So I'm making a case of feminist socialism not allowing our trans and queer bodies to be used as cannon fodder by the extreme right in their struggle to maintain gender binarism and not letting ourselves be removed from groups of cis or trans women, poor, racialized, marginalized, with no access to proper housing or fair wages. And we have to always remember that all these groups are part of the working class. And so if we are making a fight based on the need to free the working class from the shackles of domination, we need to include these groups as well. So socialist and Marxist feminisms are very well placed to produce the coalitions that go beyond the fragments and can serve as a material to combat fascism that can also be gendered and which, through all channels, exploit all women. Thank you very much.